Boker Tov, good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. Welcome to another episode of Hi There with Rabbi Leah. Last week on Thursday, there was a little technical glitch, and I understand that this class, this session that I had recorded, came across with no sound. And so I'm terribly sorry about that. Believe me, I was a lot more disappointed probably than any of you because what you got was 30 minutes of me going like this. Anyway, I didn't want you to think something was wrong with my mic again. Seems to be working. I have no idea. I think I have a little Dybbuk or a gremlin of some kind inside my laptop. But anyway, I wanted to go back and teach you again about what it was that I taught on Thursday because I think it's a very interesting subject and it's something that I don't think a lot of Jews know about, and so it really bears repeating. So I want to begin by saying, Happy New Year! That's right, Happy New Year! Now, I know you think I've probably lost my mind and that I've lost all track of time with this social isolation stuff, but that's not the case. Actually, last Thursday was the first day of the new Hebrew calendar. So I think this bears a little bit of explanation because the Hebrew calendar is a little bit confusing. There are actually at least three New Years in the Jewish year. The first one, which you all know very, very well, is Rosh Hashanah. And Rosh Hashanah actually falls on the first day, not of the first month of the year, but of the seventh month of the year. It falls on the first of Tishrei. So why do we call it the new year if it's actually the seventh month of the year? That makes no sense at all, does it? Well, from a standpoint of the Torah, it makes sense because the ancient rabbis, through God only knows what kind of system, were able to figure out that the first day, the birthday, the birth date of the year, in other words, the day on which the world was created, was the first of Tishrei. So that would be like your birthday or my birthday. For example, my birthday is June 1st. That is the first day, excuse me, I know I shouldn't touch my face. That is the first day of my new year. June 1st begins another year of my life. It's not January 1st, it's not the beginning of the calendar year, but it's the beginning of the new year that the world was born. Does that make sense? So it's appropriate to wish people good Yontif. It's appropriate to wish people a Shana Tova, a Happy New Year, but it isn't actually the first month of the Hebrew calendar. The first month of the Hebrew calendar started last Thursday, and that is the month of Nisan. So that's why I wished you a happy birthday. Um, so the second, in addition to Rosh Hashanah, which we consider the Jewish New Year because it's the birthday of the world, there is a second Jewish New Year, and it's the New Year for trees, which we call Tu B'Shvat, and that comes usually at the end of January, beginning of February. So we observed that a couple months ago. It was February 6th, so it's not quite 2 months ago. But why do we have a New Year for trees? Doesn't that seem a little bit bizarre? We call it the Jewish Arbor Day because we're supposed to plant trees and do programs around ecology and the earth and taking care of this planet and so on and so forth. Well, you have to kind of put your ancient Israelite yarmulke on and remember that the ancient Israelites, the primary vocation, the primary source of income, the primary endeavor was agriculture. This was an agrarian society, and people grew crops for themselves and trees for themselves. And then also, not only did they use the produce for their own purposes, but they might also sell. So if I had orange trees and the guy down the road had plums, I would grow the oranges and we would do an exchange, or I would sell him my produce and so on. So why do we have a birthday for trees? Why is the 15th of the month of Shvat, which is Tu B'Shvat, a birthday for trees? That is the day that the Torah designates that when you plant a tree, you count from that day to find out how many years old the tree is. They didn't count the rings in the trunk. They counted the years from the day the tree was planted, because Jewish law tells us that you are not permitted to harvest, pick the fruit of a tree for the first 3 years of that tree's life. And indeed, if you know anything about fruit-bearing trees, you can potentially harm the future produce, the future production of that tree by harvesting the fruit too soon. And somehow the ancients understood this, and they knew that the longer they waited, the better the fruit would be, and the greater the likelihood that that tree would continue to produce fruit. So, so here's how they counted the birthdays of the trees. On Tu B'Shvat, the 15th day of the month of Shvat. If you planted the tree on that day, the next year, on the 15th of Shvat, that tree would be 1 year old, and the following year it would be 2 years old, and another year it would be 3 years old, and then in the fourth year you could pick the fruit. But in that fourth year, you weren't able to sell that produce. It had to go, the 10% of it had to go as a tithe to the high priest, and another tenth of it to the Levites. Because remember, the priests and the Levites didn't have day jobs. They didn't have a gig outside of the temple in Jerusalem. So they lived off of the sacrifices and the tithes that the Israelites brought to them. So in that fourth year, you would tithe that fruit or that produce, and then you would start to, you could also use it for your own purposes, but you weren't selling it in the marketplace. So it's very interesting to note that Tu B'Shvat, on the 15th of the month of Shvat, along with the 3 major pilgrimage festivals, all fall on the 15th of a month. And I'm referring to Shavuot, Shavuos, which will come in late May this year, always the 15th of the month. Actually, Shavuot is a little bit earlier, but Sukkot is the 15th of the month. Pesach is the 15th of the month that it falls in. And so we have all these festivals that fall on the 15th of the Hebrew month. So here's the question. What's so significant about the 15th of a Hebrew month? I don't hear you. I'll give you the answer. The Hebrew calendar, as you may be aware, and you probably are because I've talked about it before, is a lunar calendar. That means the Hebrew month runs anywhere from 28 to 29 days. It starts on the first of the month, and the moon is new. It's what we call Rosh Chodesh, the head of the moon. So when you look up in the night sky on the first of a Hebrew month, it's going to be pitch dark. And when you lived in ancient Israel without street lights and neon lights and anything to get in the way of looking up in the sky and really seeing what was up there, it was dark. There was no moon, or maybe there was just a tiny sliver. 15 days later, on the 15th of the month, by the time we get there, the moon is now full. And then by the end of the month and on the cusp of the new moon, once again, there's no moon. It's dark. So it would make sense to have these festivals in the middle of a month when the moon is full and you have the maximum amount of moonlight by which to celebrate the festival and to harvest your crops. So, particularly with Sukkot and Pesach, we know those holidays always come at a full moon. Purim falls on a full moon, although that's not one of the pilgrimage holidays because it doesn't represent a harvest time. And so, why would you want a full moon? So that you can party. You can party later, you can pick your crops, and so on. The other thing interesting about Tu B'Shvat and why we count these years of the trees is because, as I said, if you are in the agriculture business, you want to be able to get that fruit to market as quickly as you can, or the produce from the trees, whether it's nuts or fruits or whatever it might be. So let's say you plant a tree on the 13th of Shvat, 2 days before Tu B'Shvat, which is the 15th. That tree is actually considered a full year old, even though it's only 2 days later. So you see what you've done by planting just a little bit before the holiday or that particular date. You've already got a year under your belt, and it's that much sooner that you can harvest the fruit. So from an agricultural perspective, this is really important. And as I said, as moderns on Tu B'Shvat, we will have Tu B'Shvat seders, we will plant trees, we will have special fruits and nuts, and that is how we observe the holiday now. So this is all kind of a long roundabout way of telling you why the 1st of Nisan is so important. And that is what last Thursday was. It was the 1st of the month of Nisan. And on the 15th of this month, it will be Pesach. And if you remember that at least 30 years ago, when the airlift took place of the Ethiopian children who came from Ethiopia to Israel, that happened right before Pesach, literally the day before, when the moon was almost at its fullest, and these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Ethiopian Jewish children walked through the desert for a number of days until finally, on Erev Pesach, on the 14th of Nisan, they were loaded onto the planes, which took them to safety in Israel. So they had the benefit of a moon that was getting larger each day with which they could do their travels. And similarly, in ancient Israel, on the 3 pilgrimage festivals, Sukkot, Shavuot, and Pesach, you're traveling to Jerusalem. It is an ingathering from all over the country of Israel. And therefore, you want to have the brightest moonlight by which to travel. So just a little tidbit about the Hebrew calendar. So why else is Nisan important? Well, because Pesach is important, Passover. And last Saturday, not this past Saturday, but the one before, is a special Shabbat called Shabbat HaChodesh. And the word Chodesh means month. So why do we call it the Shabbat of the new month? That kind of doesn't make any sense because every month has a first day of the month, right? So why don't we observe Shabbat HaChodesh every month? Well, we do observe Rosh Chodesh every month. There are special prayers that are said for the new month. But Nisan, the month of Nisan, is specifically designated in the Torah as a special month on which special prayers are said because it is the month in which the exodus from Egypt occurred as the Israelites began their journey. Now, that's 2 New Years, actually 3. So we talked about Rosh Hashanah, we talked about Tu B'Shvat, and we talked about the 1st of Nisan. And the 1st of Nisan was also a new year for the kings. Now, we don't have any kings anymore in this country. at least no kings that we recognize as kings. But we do have a whole Tanakh, the second section of our Hebrew Bible, that talks about the Israelite kings. And God warned Moses and said, those people are going to want a king when they get into the promised land. And I really don't want them to have kings because kings are nothing but trouble. But if they really want a king, I'll tell you what, Moses, they can have a king, but I have to be the one that ordains who the king is. They can't pick the king. I got to pick the king. And so, Moses relayed that information to the Israelite and said, hey, guys, you're about to go into the promised land. I know you want these kings. They're nothing but bad news, but I'm not going to be there to stop you. However, you have to let God choose them, which, for example, is how, we know the story of King David. He was just a poor shepherd boy, and he was the one that God ordained to become the king. So kings reigned for a period of years. And we know from reading the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, in the second section, there are 4 books that describe the reigns of all the kings. And they are the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel, and then 1st and 2nd Kings. And we hear all about Jeroboam and Hezekiah and David and Solomon, and some of these guys were good and some of these guys were not so good. But their reign always began in the spring on the first day of Nisan. So in addition to that being the month in which Pesach comes, there used to be a new year for kings. And that was kind of when their contract was renewed. And there would be all kinds of celebrations, and the people would either give a thumbs up or a thumbs down and say, yeah, you're okay, you can go on for another year, or they would say, nope, we need a new king, no good. And so we read about the reigns of the kings and how many years they reigned in these historic books in the Tanakh. And so we can kind of figure out exactly historically what years they reigned. Now, I don't know a lot about these coronation celebrations. However, what I have learned is that they were probably pretty wild parties. A lot of drinking, a lot of celebrating, and some of these kings had a lot of harem girls, particularly King Solomon. So I can kind of picture what might have been going on during these wild celebrations during the New Year for the kings. The closest thing we have to that in our country is Inauguration Day, which some people watch happily and enjoy, and others don't turn the television set on because they're more disappointed and wish that whichever president was coming into office had not been elected. So we do a New Year for the Kings every 4 years in this country. That's about the closest thing. And the inaugural balls are probably about the closest thing to the celebrations that the kings did when they were re-crowned, re-coronated. So we have these many New Years in Judaism, which I guess makes us kind of lucky because we get to celebrate them all, and we get to celebrate them all in different ways. And we still get a secular New Year on December 31st and January 1st, which, God willing, this year we're going to be able to celebrate. So that's why I wished you all a Happy New Year. I wasn't losing my mind. I actually knew what I was talking about. So I want to mention something that happened yesterday, which was Sunday, and it was really such a wonderful experience. I was part of 2 Zoom phone calls or video calls. The first one happened at 11 o'clock yesterday morning, and that one was with my immediate family. And I call it immediate family, even though it's a little bit more extended, but pretty immediate. We live in many different cities and different time zones. A couple of us are in similar time zones, but still in different cities. And so we decided to have this family Zoom, and it was at 11 o'clock Pacific time. So I logged on, and on the call was my Aunt Diane and my Uncle Joe, who live in Manhattan. And of course, they are kind of right in the middle of all this horrific stuff that's going on. They live on Third Avenue, or off Third Avenue on the Upper West Side. And my aunt actually took her iPad over to the window and pointed it down to the street. And Third Avenue was deserted. I mean, there were maybe what I could count 2 or 3 people walking on the street. And for a Sunday afternoon in New York, that was nothing. So um, my aunt just turned, this is my mother of blessed memory. This is her sister, Diane, who just turned 85 this past week, just a couple days ago. And my Uncle Joe, who's 86, who turned 86 in February. And I haven't seen them since my son's wedding 3.5 years ago, so almost 4 years ago. So that was really great. Also on the call was my brother Gordon, who is a neuropsychologist living in Madison, Wisconsin. And he has basically closed his practice because he's been at home for a couple weeks now. It's very hard to see patients when you can't do therapy with them directly, but he is doing some online things. And with him was my sister-in-law, Elaine, who is the Associate Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, Arts and Letters, excuse me, at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And she shared some really challenging things that are going on, not only at her university, but universities all over the world. Bringing kids home from semesters abroad, students who have to leave the dorms and move out immediately. And what do you do with kids who have really no home to go home to anymore? Because maybe their parents have moved, or maybe their families have downsized and don't have room for them, or maybe they don't have family that they can go home to. What online learning has become. And, hearing it directly from her was really an incredible eye opener as to what the colleges and universities are going through here in the United States and throughout the world. Also on the call was my nephew Maor, who is 24 years old, and he is currently studying for a master's in counseling. He's in his second year of the program, and of course, and he lives in the suburbs of Chicago, and of course, everything is now online because they're not going to be able to finish the year on campus. He goes to a program in the city of Chicago. My niece Ariel, who is 22, was not able to make it on the call because evidently she overslept, but she's been working at home. She is a college graduate with a degree in journalism, working for a public relations and marketing company, and evidently putting in just untold numbers of crazy hours working at home. And also on the call was my brother-in-law, Raphael Kramer. Rafi is the president of a manufacturing company in Chicago that manufactures safety equipment and personal protection equipment. So even before the virus happened, they were having, a very difficult time because of the embargoes against China and getting equipment and getting product for fabrication and so on and so forth. And so he is so busy right now retooling and manufacturing what is needed by the medical community to do their work, and trying to keep the guys in their factory 6 to 10 feet apart, making sure nobody comes down with anything. It's been a real challenge for him as well. And finally on the call were my son, Seth Shapiro, and his beautiful wife, Ashley Shapiro. And I think I've mentioned before that Ashley is a public school teacher in the Los Angeles Unified School District. She has 11 little boys in her class, ages kindergarten through second grade, and they're all autistic. And she is, if there were saints in Judaism, she would be a saint because the work that she is doing to make sure these kids have work to do at home, and it is a low income school. Most of these children come from bilingual households. Many of them do not have internet. They don't have laptops. They don't have the equipment that they need. So it's been a real challenge. And my son Seth, who many of you know is a stand-up comic, has not been going to the clubs and the bars to do his comedy, but he's been doing a lot of writing, and he's got an awful lot of great material. So that was the first call I had. And then the second call yesterday was at 5 o'clock, and that was fabulous. It was a call with my classmates from my year in Israel from 2000 to 2001, when we were studying to become rabbis, cantors, and educators. And some of these people I have not talked to in 20 years, except maybe online. Others I have more frequent conversations with. Amazing to see how many children they have, how old their kids are. We are all over the country. Some of my classmates sadly have had to deal with congregants who have passed away from the virus, and so it's been a difficult time for them. But it was so heartwarming and so wonderful. There were 44 of us that started the year in Israel together in the year 2000. And there were 23 of us on the call today. So we did pretty well considering that it was kind of a last minute thing to plan. It was really great. So I was thinking a lot about the challenges that we're experiencing right now. And yet, the fact that this is the year, that we are in the 21st century and that this is the year 2020 is a blessing in so many ways, because had this happened 10, 20, 30 years ago, it would have been so much more devastating due to the fact that our ability to communicate with one another, to stay in touch with our families, our loved ones, our friends, our doctors, the professionals in our lives would have been an entirely different situation. I think that this virus would have been far more devastating without the information that we're able to get at our fingertips to keep us safe. So there is a prayer that we say when we are grateful for something, and I am enormously grateful for for the ability to have this technology available to us, and to be able to use it to stay in touch with the people we love. So I would ask that you join me in Shehechianu. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. We praise you, Adonai, our sovereign God, ruler of the universe, who has given us life, who has sustained us, and who has brought us to this amazing age of technology that allows us to keep in touch with those we love. So I'm almost done with this session. I just want to say that I'm waiting for your emails, because this Saturday, when I do my Shabbat Chaverim program, I would really, 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 really like to do Stump the Rabbi, but I can't do it if you don't send me questions. And I don't want to run out of material. So please send me your questions. Don't forget to tune in Monday through Friday morning for Chai There with Rabbi Leah. And again, I'll remind you about Blessings Friday night and services Saturday morning. But please, please email me your questions to lhers@seacrestvillage.org. I love you all. I miss you tremendously. Lehitraot. I'll see you soon. Bye bye.